Welcome to This Organized Life. If you're a mom, wife, or coffee lover seeking advice on how to reduce clutter and reclaim time, look no further than your host, Lori Palau, founder of Simply Be Organized and author of Hot Mess, a practical guide to getting organized. For a lot of people, clutter is their dirty little secret, but it doesn't have to be. Each week, we will share practical tips, chat with experts, and provide strategies on how to keep you organized. I hope that by sharing our stories, you feel a little less alone and more empowered to tackle the areas that are holding you back. So let's get started.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of This Organized Life podcast. I'm your host, Lori Palau. And you guys, I'm so excited. I kid you not, I'm really excited for this conversation because not only do I have a great guest that I'm going to bring out, which many of you may be familiar with already, but we're going to be unpacking kind of a new lens of clutter that we've probably touched on, but we haven't necessarily named and articulated. And you know me, I'm all about if we want to solve a problem, we need to first kind of name it. It really helps us with that communication piece. So I am joined today by Dawn Madsen. Now, many of you might know Dawn because she is all over YouTube. She has her own podcast, the socials. She's an author, all the things. But she's known as the Minimal Mom. So you might know her as the Minimal Mom. She's got thousands and thousands of hours of content, video, free downloads, all the things, helping people to live a more minimalistic life. And I'm going to get her story. She's going to share all that. She's been practicing minimalism with her family for, I believe it's just over 8 years. So I want to find out a little bit about how that all came about. You know, here I'm all about removing what you don't need. So I always love to talk to minimalists just because to find out their journey. But what I really invited her on the show to talk about today is this concept of identity clutter. And I never really framed it like this. And if you guys were listening a couple months ago, we had John Deloney on the show and we were talking all about different types of clutter. And he actually was the one that said, I feel that I hold on to things a lot of times because it's part of my identity. And I asked him to unpack it and he credited Dawn to this. So I immediately reached out to her and I was like, we need to talk about this and we need to talk about it on the air. So that's how this conversation all is having this full circle moment. So without any further ado, I want to bring Dawn out to the show and let's get this great conversation going. Welcome, Dawn.
Hi, Lori. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for being here. Obviously, I kind of knew of you beforehand, just in the space, and I knew you were doing all kinds of great things. And as I said in the intro, John was on the show, we was talking about his new book, and we were talking about the connection with anxiety and clutter. And he brought up this concept, which I never really kind of looked at through that particular lens of identity clutter.
Yeah.
And I was like, ooh, can we go deeper on that? And then he brought you into the conversation. I was like, okay, I'm going to go right to the source. So tell our listeners before we get into the nuts and bolts, give everyone the backstory as much as you want to tell. You could give obviously the Cliff Notes version of you.
Yeah. So I grew up in Minnesota on a farm just outside of the Twin Cities, and we didn't have a lot growing up. It's a really modest upbringing. I always had everything I needed, but no extra. And so then when I started setting up my own house, and it was like, ooh, I can go to garage sales and thrift stores, and I can actually get a lot of stuff and some pretty nice stuff that I never had growing up, name brand stuff, inexpensively. And so I just started acquiring all the things, and no one tells us these days what it should look like to set up your house with kids and, a growing family. And so I found myself about 9 years ago, we had 4 kids, ages 4 and under, and we were living in a townhouse, and we just had all the stuff that I thought you should have when you have a family, all the toys, all the clothes, all the dishes, and I was so unhappy with it all, but yet I was so conflicted because I'm like, I should be so happy. I have everything I've ever wanted. I have 4 healthy kids. I get to stay home with them. And yet I was so thoroughly annoyed with the whole situation. I was envious of my husband who got to go to work and be around adults every day. I was resentful that I had to be the one to pick everything up and do the dishes before he got home from work. And so I was just really not enjoying being a mom. And so I was just like on Pinterest one day and I came across a podcast with Joshua Becker, who's a well-known minimalist. And in the podcast, he just said this like one line. He's like, "Did you know you don't have to have all of this stuff?" And that's all he said. I've gone back and listened to it. It wasn't even in a like super dramatic way. He like literally just said, "Did you know you don't have to have all this stuff?" And I think I was so desperate at the time to not have to manage all of this stuff anymore that I was like, "No, Joshua, I didn't know this." And I started Googling minimalism and there was nothing out there. Like all you could find was like the minimalist and like a tour of their like New York City apartment that had like nothing in it. And I'm like, you don't have kids. Like you don't understand like how many toys and how many forks and how many bath towels. And so there was one other gal, the minimalist mom, and she was out of Europe. And so I'm like, you don't even fully get it either. I have a normal size house in a normal suburb and I have access to everything, anything that I want anytime. And so over the course of the next year, I would just try to find anything I could on simple living. How far could I go? And mostly I had to just look at it as an experiment. And so I just was going to go as far as I needed to feel like my house was easy and under control. And so over the course of that year, we got rid of about 80 to 85% of our stuff. I did not think I would have to go that far to have a home that was easy to manage and to get to a point where I really enjoyed being a mom again, managing our house, and also feeling like I could do some of the other things like starting my blog that I was really passionate about at the time. So I was surprised how far I had to go, but I don't miss any of it. We've gone further since then. I don't miss any of it. And I'm, so passionate about the topic now that I'm like shouting it from the rooftops of YouTube whenever I get the chance.
Yeah. And I love that. And the interesting thing is, and we've had Josh on the show before, like he's great. And your kids grew up with this, right? So they were 4 and under when this whole thing started. And so they didn't really know what was going on. Like you're decluttering toys that they're not playing with and things. And I know there's people that are listening out there and they're like, okay, my 8-year-old would be like, what on earth are you doing? Because
Mm-hmm.
like anything, and I'm notorious for that, where I'm like, I come onto this, like whatever it is, like we're doing this, like, okay, we're doing this with our budget and we're doing this now and we're decluttering. And my kids would be, who are grown now, but they'd be like,
Yeah.
oh God, what is she into now?
Yeah.
So I'm sure there are people that are out there that are like, I'm going to be faced with a lot of resistance
Yes.
because it's not just about me. What I'm
Totally.
doing is
Mm-hmm.
impacting the other members of my family. And even though they're your kids and
Mm-hmm.
they technically are supposed to do what you say, you're going to get that pushback. So, and I'm sure that's something
Totally.
that you hear a lot in your community.
Yes. So we always say start with your own stuff first. So start with your clothes. For me, the kitchen was my domain, so I could do what I needed to do. So start with the things that you have control over. And I was visiting with the author of Simplicity Parenting, Kim John Payne, and he's a child therapist and everything. He's worked with hundreds of families, and he said, if you want your child to have a clean and tidy room, start with your room and then talk about it. Say, wow, I love going into my bedroom now. Wow, it feels so good. Wow, it's so easy to keep clean. Our kids don't know what they don't know, but I believe now all kids are minimalists at heart. Kids are not good at managing inventory. So I talk about this idea that everything in our house is inventory that we have to manage. And as women, most of us are the chief inventory managers, right? Our brains, when you look at the brain science, our brains are not good at managing inventory. They're not good at keeping track of stuff. They're not good at organizing things. We have to have very low inventory for Lori, for your organizing tactics to work, right? We declutter first, we reduce the inventory, and then we have a chance at that stuff working. Our kids are the same way. Our kids are so overwhelmed with things and stuff, but they don't know any different. They live in a world where they're being sold to and told you need the latest toys and all the things and the clothes and the tennis shoes and all. they don't know what they don't know. So there's an element of us demonstrating it and doing it first. And then we do have other tactics that we can use with them if they're a little bit older, if they have their own things they've bought or gotten as gifts that then we can use to go a little bit further with them too.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, we talk about that all the time here, which is you got to start, you got to lead by example. You have to model that behavior. It's
Mhm.
really hard when you're sitting there. And I know as parents, you have 4 kids, I've got 2, but like there's this do as I say, not as I do thing. And there are going to be some times where it's like, yes, I'm an adult. I can say this one thing and have a different set of rules for you. But if you're trying to teach your kid to pick up after themselves, to put things back, I can't tell you how many people don't do that by themselves, and they don't do it a lot of times because it's work, it's cumbersome. Like you said, there's too many steps, and the less stuff you have, the less steps you need. And
Mhm.
so it's kind of getting that momentum. And for some people, I think it's that like you almost felt that permission that, hey, I'm okay if I don't have all of these things.
Yeah, and there's just so much freedom that comes from that. Again, when you look at the brain science, like the clutter releases stress hormones, right? And what I've really been realizing recently too is that we want, especially if you have kids in the house still, we need routines. Like you hear the word rhythm, right? We need routines and rhythm. We need to autopilot things. Like we need to get certain things in our house just clicking along where we don't have to use so much brain energy. And I realized I'm like, why? Any area that I've ever struggled to develop a habit or a routine, it's usually because there's still too much clutter or inventory. That clutter directly gets in the way of us being able to automate and put things just on a cycle that we don't have to put so much energy into. I remember when our kids, we homeschool now, but when they were going to school, I would get so frustrated because I'm like, every morning we do the same thing to get ready for school. You have to get your shoes on and your backpack and you have to make your lunch. Why is it like it's brand new every morning? And I'm like, well, because it's not easy to see the stuff for their lunch. It's not their backpack doesn't go in the exact same spot every day. They just need one pair of shoes to choose from. Like a 5-year-old should not be choosing between different pairs of shoes in the morning, right? And so there was still too much stuff cluttering it up to be able to get to this magical point we're all trying to get to where things can be routine and habit and we don't have to fight about it every single morning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about adults struggling with decision fatigue. Our kids struggle with it too. I mean, they have it. And I get what I always tell people, and this is why we're going to kind of move into the whole identity clutter, is we don't always have the language. Like a child might not be like, I'm struggling with decision fatigue. They're not going to have that to be able to articulate. It's going to come in a tantrum, or they're just going to freeze, right? They're just going to shut down because they don't know, they're so overwhelmed. And so if we as parents can remove some of that decision fatigue, it makes it so much easier, and then you'll have less conflict. I remember when she's now 20, she's my stubborn one, right? Like there's always one, and she knows. I call her out on it. She's fine with it. Well, ish. But she knows, she owns it. And when she was younger, like preschool, she only wanted to wear dresses. Only wanted to wear dresses to school. And her older sister was more of that tomboy kid. So I didn't have a ton of dresses to choose from. And I was like, I'm not going out and wardrobe, like creating a whole second wardrobe for a 3 and a 4-year-old. Just not happening. And so we would have these battles with her of like, I only want to wear a dress. I only want to wear this dress. And so I simplified the closet. Instead of me having this full closet of all of these, like, little jogger suits, I got rid of them because it was this losing battle. And I said, here are your handful of dresses that you can choose from. You decide, you go to school, whatever, this was literally preschool. She was there like 3 days a week. You pick which ones you want to wear. And she had this amount to choose from. And it radically changed the dynamic. So you're on mute.
Mhm.
Oh, there you go. So,
Yep.
um,
Yeah.
and so again, I think we take for granted the things that we can do as parents.
Yes. Yes. And isn't I was rereading Marie Kondo's book, The Changing Magic of Tidying Up. I know
Uh huh.
that book sometimes it's a little controversial, but I was going through it again. And I'm like, we've forgotten that as adults, we get to choose our environment. No one is making us keep anything. And we can, she asked the question, like, does it spark joy? And sometimes we're like, that's too arbitrary, Marie. And I would keep too much stuff if I use, but what if we did set up our environment for exactly the season that we're in right now? And we're using the stuff and we can clearly see that. I love this example with your daughter, but what if it was just as easy for me to get dressed in the morning there,
So
right?
fair. So
Right?
fair. Yeah,
That we like,
absolutely.
why are we surrounding ourselves with things that we don't enjoy, that we don't like anymore because we spent money on it or because my mom thinks, I should keep this. And so I love that. I know we want to switch gears, but one other note too about simplifying
Yeah.
kid stuff is that if your kids are at all neurodiverse, if there's ADHD, ADD, ODD, all the different Ds,
All the D's.
they thrive. They thrive in highly simplified spaces. It is such a kindness for you to simplify their clothes and their shoes and their toys, and it's countercultural. It's not our intuition as a parent. We want our kids to have everything that they want and need. And we're sold so many things. But if you will highly, highly, highly simplify their space, I think you're going to see that they thrive in that. I hear that every single day from parents. I've never heard the opposite, that I took away stuff and now they're spiraling or they're doing worse. That is every single day I get testimonies from parents that were willing to do an experiment, to just test it out, to just box some stuff up, and they just keep going further and further because their kids do so well. And actually, even if your kid isn't neurodiverse, they thrive in that same kind of environment. So you can't go wrong either way, but especially if that is something that your family is faced with, if you would be willing to test that out, there's just so much research and just so many testimonies of how that sets them up for success.
Thank you so much for saying that, because we actually did a whole series last year on neurodiversity, specifically focusing with the ADHD lens, not,
Mm-hmm.
kind of going through that. And because my daughter's got ADHD and a bunch of other processing things, and she's spoken freely about it. And it bears repeating, because
Mm-hmm.
I could not agree more. So thank you for just putting that reminder out there for anybody that's new, that this is the first time you're hearing that. Thank you so much. Okay, let's get into the topic, because of course we could talk about all the things for hours and hours. But I really want you to talk about this concept of identity clutter,
Yeah.
how you kind of came up with that, and like what it means, what it represents. So I'm just going to turn the mic over to you.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily want to take credit for the idea. I hear it mentioned multiple ways, like identity clutter or fantasy self often resonates with women as well. But it's these things that we are hanging on to that we're not using, but we keep them because they represent who we want to be, who an ideal version is, either looking forward, like the exercise gear that I really want to imagine myself using, or things from the past. So especially school teachers really fall into this. They have a hard time getting rid of curriculum and books. When you were talking with John Deloney, he'll talk about books. He's like, knowledge is power. And if I get rid of my books, like, who am I? Like, what is that? Am I even a scholar, or am I smart if I don't have like hundreds of books around me, right? Yet there's so much like benefit and beauty in all these things. And they also weigh on us and they stress us out, because these things that are sometimes a benefit, when we're not using them in that way, they mock us. And they're like, why aren't you reading me? And why aren't you highlighting me? And why aren't you working out in me? And why aren't you scrapbooking me? All these different things that we think we should be doing. And so often the sense we get from these things, and it's very subconscious, we're not usually even picking up on it, but is this like FOMO and this kind of yuck feelings of like, why aren't I measuring up and why aren't I doing those things?
I love it. And because we talk, I kind of, just to set the stage. So I talk in three main camps of clutter, right? Just three broad buckets: physical, which is obvious, emotional, and within that would fall the identity clutter, and then
Mm-hmm.
calendar, which is more of that productivity, time management, being overscheduled, right? So
Yeah.
just for, if I drop a word out there that you're like, wait, what? Or for our listeners, those are the kind of the three main, and then there's all the spin-offs that come, digital
Mm-hmm.
mental load,
Yeah.
financial clutter, all that. When you were talking, all I kept thinking of is that voice that's shame. The two words that came to my mind are shame and scolding.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't you, why aren't you a size whatever again?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you, I'm just a stay-at-home mom and I don't have my career anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Or why aren't you, I know also in John's
Mm-hmm.
case, like, why aren't I playing guitar, or why am I this,
Yeah.
or like you said, what was, so it's the shame and the scolding. And I
Yeah.
always say clutter, which is to me anything that's not serving you at that point,
Mm-hmm.
is really more about how it makes us feel.
Yes.
That's the biggest impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, Fumio Sasaki in his book, Goodbye Things, he talks about the silent to-do list and how everything in our house is sending out a message of something that we need to do. So again, this identity clutter, the books are saying, you need to read me. Even I noticed I had like a stack of HGTV magazines that I used to keep on our coffee table. And even those were like, excuse me, even those were saying, well, you need to look for the good, like the projects in me and the good paint colors and the new trends. Like you need to read me and archive these ideas and keep track of it and don't forget about it. And I'm like, when I really paid attention to it, I'm like, oh no, like these messages are not at all helpful. And so if we would just even first step, start to be aware of, like you said, how is this making me feel? What messages is this sending? When I open my closet doors first thing in the morning and I see things with the tags on them because I've never actually been able to fit in, and that's telling me, why don't you fit into me? When are you going to fit into me? Why did you buy me? Why are you so irresponsible with your resources? Like, oh, don't let my husband see that, or, and we're not like hiding things, right? And so, like, it is when you become aware of it. I've heard women say, like, oh no, my house isn't like talking to me. My house is yelling at me all of these things. And we sense that kind of yuck feeling in our house, that kind of like low-lying anxiety, but we sometimes have a difficult time putting our finger on, like, but what is it? And it's exactly like you said, it's how are these things making me feel?
I also want to challenge you, or like flip the script. I wonder, and I thought of it when you mentioned about the magazines, because again, that was like, that's a big thing. And that was obviously like a really big thing back when people read more tangible magazines. But I wonder if people are struggling with identity clutter because it props them up. It's
Mm,
not the shame spiral, but on the flip side of,
mhm,
I'm surrounding myself with these things. I have every issue of Martha Stewart
mhm,
living because I have a beautiful home and I'm a good homemaker, or fill in the blank, or
mhm,
I have all of these books because I
mhm,
am smart and I'm a
mhm,
scholar. And again, almost to the flip side, as a reassurance for
mhm.
yourself,
Yeah.
materialistic representation. And I'll even talk about, trending with our kids, teens and tweens and whatnot. Like, if I see kids with one more Stanley Cup, no offense to Stanley, right there, like, don't ban me or hate me, but like, how many Stanley Cups does a child need? Like
Mhm.
zero. But do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But all these, like, I'm cool, I'm this, and we have to accumulate more and more and more, because we wind up tying the stuff to who we are.
Absolutely. And that's why I never want to oversimplify this process, because it's not as simple as like, oh, well, get a tote and start, just start decluttering it. Like it really does take some unraveling of, like, and I know that's something John was really wrestling with. Why am I keeping this? Who does this stuff say that I am? And who am I without it? That's a very personal journey, when really our whole lives we've wanted the brand name clothes and the nice vehicles, and like that's just been something we've all grown up with and we've all desired. And I heard an interesting thing the other day too that said, because I'm always like, why do we care about brand name? Why do we care about a Stanley mug? And I'm walking around with my Stanley mug, right? Well, because it says we fit in. And if we can afford nice vehicles and nice clothes, not only do I fit in, I am a vibrant and successful member of our tribe. Therefore, if everyone is going to pack up in the middle of the night and take off because there's some kind of threat, they're not going to leave me behind, right? So deep wired in our brain, it is a survival thing to look successful. And for us, that is synonymous with brand name and things. So to start to like dismantle that and say, am I okay? Like, am I still okay? And do I have things to offer if I'm not surrounded by all of this stuff? And the truth is, we all know, yes, absolutely, none of us are our stuff, but that takes some intentionality and some thought.
Which brings me to my next question. So if how do you flip that switch in your brain to go from recognizing it? Because first that's the first step, right?
Hmm.
We gotta recognize it. But then how do you go, okay, how do I find the permission within
Hmm.
myself
Yeah.
to relinquish that control
Yeah.
and start getting rid of it?
Hmm.
That I think is the $1 million question, because for so
Yeah.
many people, before I let you answer, and then I promise I
Hmm.
will. I have a friend of mine, true story, who's battling cancer right now. And she's, fingers crossed, going to be doing, do come out on the other side thriving. But when it happened, she's somebody that had a lot of stuff, and she loved all the things, and she could afford them, right? So
Hmm.
she
Hmm.
could afford them, but she was an accumulator of things. And when she was faced with this could have potentially life or death thing, immediately she's like, I don't want any of it, right? And
Hmm.
so, and it changed kind of her mind shift. And I think for so many of us, when something radical happens in our lives, that's the
Hmm.
catalyst. But I don't want it to have to be that, right? I would have
Yeah.
loved for her, just using
Hmm.
her as an example, to have that epiphany moment
Hmm.
without being faced with this like
Yeah.
potential tragedy on the horizon.
Yeah.
So, how do we get in front of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's very difficult to live every day like we're dying, right? Like there's that like song "Live Like You're Dying," Garth Brooks, or whatever. And it's like you can't actually live like that every day. But don't start with the identity clutter. Start with easier areas. Start with your mudroom and your bathroom. And I mean, don't get me wrong, each of their spaces there can be like bathrooms, like we can have lots of base creams and things, trying to be what we want to be, but start in the kitchen and get some success under your belt. Start to feel like, I talk about like with the kitchen, it should really be set up to serve us in our current style of cooking right now, but it becomes a time capsule too. Everything we registered for our wedding and, things we picked up that we at the pampered chef party that we thought we would use and we don't. Set it up to serve you for this current season of life that you're in. And that might mean if you have like expensive gadgets or beauty creams or things, you might use like what I call a time will tell bin. So you might take like a Rubbermaid tote or an Amazon box, and you might just pack some stuff away for a little bit and say, I'm going to put these expensive gadgety things in there. I'm going to set it aside. I'm going to see what it feels like to be in my kitchen without those things. And then I know if I want it, I can go back and grab it. But then after 3 to 6 months, you just donate it all because now you have some trust with yourself. And we don't have to do that a lot of times until we start to see like, no, I'm making good decisions. I trust myself. So once you have a little success with that in areas that aren't as emotionally draining, then it becomes easier to start to tackle some of this identity stuff. But I also think the other side of that coin is there is a part where I do need to know, what am I here for? What is my goal? And I think that's part of what propelled me early on and made it a little bit easier for me was that I knew that I wanted to free up time in my day so I could work on my blog. So my first blog was called I Think We Could Be Friends. And I would recruit, like I had friends that were therapists and I would recruit them to, write parenting articles and stuff back in the days of blogging where that's how you like got this like really new, cool information. Right. And so, I've always had so much passion around helping women. I'm like, I want you to have the tools to be successful. And now that's, evolved into helping women declutter. But even that, I'm not so much, I don't care so much about like the actual techniques of decluttering. I want you to get your house decluttered so that you can like move on with life and do the thing that like lights you up. Like, what do you get excited about talking about? I was visiting with a couple and they have an organization. that helps women in Africa. They give them microloans so these women can start their own business, and it transforms whole villages, right? And so I'm like, I want to partner with you. I want to help raise money. I want to spread the news. And the gal was, she was like, Dawn, you like light up when you start talking about this. And I'm like, yeah, it's just like all I want. I don't even want to be the one in front. I still don't know how I got this big YouTube channel because I don't even want to be the one in front. I just want to support other women. And so I know what I want to do with my time when it's freed up. And I know now what I want my identity to be and what types of things in my house support that and what things don't. I used to love when I was young, I ran a marathon and I was into working out. And so I had all the things. And that's not who I am anymore. I got rid of all my old sewing projects. I grew up in 4-H and we sewed clothes and things. And I would sew pillow covers because we had no money. I made all my own curtains. That's not who I am anymore. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that season wasn't important and those things weren't important. But when I was willing to let go of that stuff, set up my house to support who I'm becoming, my future self, and not let it be this time capsule of the past, there's so much freedom in that. And I feel confident, and I don't need the brand name stuff, and I don't need all the other stuff to tell me who I am, because that's who I was, and that's great. And there's a place for that, but that's not who I am and who I'm becoming.
I love that. And there's so much there, right? That we could even go deeper and deeper where you look at what is our clutter masking, right? You've come to
Mhm.
this point because you are confident in who you are. And I'm sure, like anybody, we all have our moments of insecurity and things that we, you know, like as Jessica Honecker says, you go scared, but you are rooted. And I think for so many people, clutter represents like it's masking that insecurity that we
Mhm.
have. And
Mhm.
when we aren't confident in what our purpose is or what our mission is or why we're here, that's that stuff is just is part of a shield.
Oh, yeah. And I couldn't believe, Lori, that stuff, again, going back to the silent to-do list, when I'm 9 years ago in my townhouse drowning in stuff, that stuff was telling me, you're a bad mom, you're a bad wife, you suck at housekeeping. Like, why can't you get it together? It's a new year, it was a new thing. You thought you printed this printable off of Pinterest. You were gonna finally stay on top of the kitchen and the laundry. And I could not believe, looking back now, how much that stuff was belittling me and keeping me down, no confidence. And even if you're like, I don't know exactly what that thing is that I'm meant to do or what's going to light me up, if you will take the steps to work on decluttering our house, we all know there's stuff in our house we don't need anymore. If you will work to just remove the stuff that clearly you don't need anymore, I couldn't believe how much confidence that gave me. So you might not know right now, but if you'll begin working on it a little bit every day, your confidence will build in yourself. And it's kind of like that process of decluttering and getting rid of the stuff. It unhooks us from the Stanley mugs and the name brand thing. It puts stuff in its proper place in our life. And we see it now. It's a tool. Like you said, it should be useful. It should be working for me and in this season. And if not, it's clutter and I don't need it. And I have permission to let it go. And through that process, I gained so much confidence in myself. I don't know if I hadn't gotten my house decluttered and everything, I don't know where I would be like today. I don't know what I would be doing. I don't think I would be experiencing the things I am if I hadn't regained the confidence in myself through the process of decluttering our home and living simply, and how that gave me the necessary bandwidth I needed to be able to take one step forward each time when I'm like, I think I'm going to start a YouTube channel. Okay. Um, and it was still small steps. Like, it's super cool where I am today, but there was nothing glamorous about my beginning steps, but through simplifying our house, I feel like I had the confidence to just put one foot in front of the other.
I love that. I love that. Tell our listeners, where can they find you if they want to learn more, want to go deeper, just see all the amazing things that you're doing. And again, we have a lot of women who listen to our show that are in a transition. They are going through, what do I want my next step to be? Whether they have
Yeah.
kids going off to school, they want to do a career change, empty nesters. So I love hearing from other women entrepreneurs to that share their stories, because again, I think we have a tendency to like look at what people are and just think, oh, it was easy for them, or
Hmm.
they just did this and it just
Yeah.
magically appeared.
Hmm.
And that's not. the case. So thank you for
Yeah.
just putting that out there as well.
Yeah. So I spend most of my time on YouTube. So if you just go to YouTube and search The Minimal Mom, I have over 800 videos there now to just show you all the ins and outs of decluttering. There really isn't a topic that we haven't covered. So that's where I spend most of my time. And for anyone, have you had Matt Paxton on this book,
That's
Keep the Memories?
Matt's my buddies.
Yeah.
And I would show you that book, but I took my copy and lent it to somebody, and I've never seen it again.
It's
So
gold. It is so good. If you are downsizing, empty nesting, or helping parents through that season, you have to read this book. It is so practical and helpful. So yeah, I'm
yes,
sure you've said
thank you.
that before, but
Yes,
I'll
no,
I'll
and
double.
it's so true. No, I
Yeah.
love it. And Matt, like I said, Matt's been on our show a few times. We've
Mhm.
become friends, and yeah, I've had his wife Zoe on as
Oh
well.
yeah, she's great too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's awesome. So,
Mhm.
all right, well, you're ready, like kicked off, because I always ask our guests two questions.
Mhm.
Well, kind of three. One of them is a book review. So I don't know I mean, Matt's book is great, love it.
Mhm.
The other two questions, and I love asking people that are in kind of our space because it kind of really peels back the curtain. So we know that, like you said, we go through seasons. Sometimes we are thriving in certain areas and we feel like we're on top of our game, and other times we feel like a bit of a hot mess. So in your life right now, where do you feel with a mom of, how old are your kids now? Like,
Yeah, so we have 4 kids. They're 9 through 14.
right. So you're like,
Mhm.
there's stuff. They're involved in like
Yeah.
activities and, all the things. Where do you feel that you're the most organized, and where do you feel like things are like a little off the rails?
Yeah, I literally, because of such a busy season we're in, and I like calendar clutter, I keep at bay. Like I agree to so little, and yet I'm still like, it's just the season. Like there's just lots of things to drive to and go to. The things from his siblings when they're like, "Oh, I'm just gonna get Mom, you can donate," and he's like, "No, I'll take it." And so it's just like I have still not found the best tactics. I think it's grace, so I can understand those of you who are like, you don't understand, my child is attached to everything. I'm like, no, I actually do. Like, and his room is it's a mess, and so I wouldn't want you to see that right now.
Hey, and I get it. And I have one of those too. So I always say this was, poetic justice, because this is what I do for a living. And I've got a kid that thinks everything has feelings, and we can't get rid
Yeah.
of it because they have
Right.
feelings. So
Yep. Yep.
I totally get it. Dawn, thank you so much for coming on and for making time for us and sharing this perspective and your story. I know that this is really going to be like a big aha moment, just like that one podcast that you listened to with Joshua
Yeah.
Becker all those years ago. So thank you so much. If this is your first time tuning in, make sure to click the subscribe, follow button wherever you're listening or watching. And we'll be back next week with another episode. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, please spread the love and share it with your friends. And if this is your first time joining us, make sure to click the subscribe button wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, please leave us a review so other people know that our show is worth the listen. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram at This Organized Life Podcast. And if you'd like to connect with us, you can head on over to our website at simply the letter B like boy organized.com, which is filled with tons of resources, including free downloads, checklists, links to our amazing organizing partners, and all of our digital offerings. I'll see you next week for another episode of This Organized Life.